Thanks for joining us for this Microsoft Security Tech Talk on Privileged Access Management. Here's a quick introduction to the popular Microsoft Tech Talks. If this is your first time, and if you have joined one of them, because I think everyone's now here, these webinars are free technical workshops. They're semi-structured and include some slides, as well as presenting using live demo environments. So we are tempting fate sometimes. And at this point, I'm excited to introduce Matt. Matt Smith joined Softworks in 2010 and is our presenter today. He's joined with a proven track record in design, implementation, as well as support of Microsoft enterprise applications and operating systems. And Matt oversees the roadmap and feature definition of Softworks' services. And for that, he employs just a wealth of product knowledge and experience from over 20 years in the managed services industry. Matt's also got a passion for communicating technical Microsoft security capabilities in ways that are easily accessible. And so on that note, I am going to hand you over to Matt for the run through of the Tech Talk. Thanks, over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Patrick. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So as Patrick said, we're going to have a little look today at privilege management, or more specifically in Microsoft's environment, privileged identity management. We might touch a little bit on the differences around that between access management and identity management, but they're all part of a set of tools that we use in order to kind of secure our user accounts that the administrators use, and also for other kind of delegated roles that we want to provide to people on a kind of short-term basis, or restrict their access when they're not performing that particular role. So today we'll look through kind of what the privileged identity management services from Microsoft are. We'll keep the slides fairly minimal, and we'll dive right into the environment, and I'll take you through some of the scenarios and what's possible. As Patrick said, please do put your questions in the Q&A as we go along. I will try and answer some of them as we go if I see them, otherwise we will answer them all at the end. So we'll be looking at what we can do with AD roles or Azure AD roles, resource access, and any other kind of type of privileged authentication that we can control through the online platform, and how we review who's got access to which services and roles through Azure AD. So before we're going to go into the live demo, I just want to make sure that everybody's got a bit of background on how this works and what the kind of basic premise is behind this access configuration. So essentially what we're talking about is an administrator setting up a policy where users need to activate their ability to perform a certain role or access a certain system or service kind of just in time at the point they need to perform that role. And the basic idea behind that is to ensure that for the rest of the time, should their account become compromised or their credentials be compromised for any reason, and hopefully you've all got some conditional access services in place to help mitigate against that. But should that happen, or should they give their credentials out mistakenly, that there's an additional set of checks in place before they gain access to things like administrative roles, or maybe software or services like your HR platform that could potentially give them access, or give somebody who's compromised that account access to data, or the ability to change configuration, or grant themselves further access to more systems or services in your IT environment. So how we go about this is an administrator of the identity management system creates a set of rules that the user has to adhere to in order to obtain that privileged access right. It's typically something like an approval process, and again with like an additional 2FA check, something along those lines. But as those users obtain that access, or if somebody was to try and bypass that and grant somebody access directly, this service or these services are designed to notify everybody who participates in the privileged identity management capability, that has happened. So it's like a checks and balances piece as well. So there's an audit trail and a sort of alert notification process should somebody try and bypass it, or to also notify everybody when those roles are activated if you need that kind of level of visibility. All of that's configurable, so we'll have a little look today at how you can configure those kind of policies or controls that go around it. The most important piece is that these are rights that they obtain for a short period of time. So as an example, your help desk or your support desk team, when they need to go in and adjust somebody's permissions to something, or if they need a level of access to amend the kind of control that's around an application or something like conditional access, that they only have that right for maybe an hour or two or the day, and then it automatically expires so that you don't accidentally leave a whole load of accounts with potential exposure because they have these administrative rights. So it's all about expiring that access right within a fixed period of time. And then arguably probably the most important bit is the ability to then continuously review who's got these capabilities, have an automated process around it, because I'm sure we're all guilty of not rechecking kind of who's a member of which administrative group regularly enough, although I'm sure most of our IT policies say that we are doing this and performing those checks. So these services give us a way to automate that and ensure that on a regular basis we review who's got access to which roles and which systems, and to make sure that they should still have that level of access, and if we want to, automate the process of reapproving them for that access capability. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of just a background on what the purpose of it is, or what this system is designed to do, and kind of how it's structured. Now, we're going to dive pretty much straight into a sort of live demonstration of what's possible with the Azure directory system. So hopefully the internet gods will play nicely with us today, and we won't have any problems with our connections. But let's start by just explaining kind of where this service is found, and then we'll dive into what some of the configuration capabilities are. You can find it through the Azure portal. It's a service in its own right under identity governance or privileged access management. There's kind of two portals to it, but you'll also find it in the Azure Active Directory under the identity governance menu that we can see here. So once we're into the identity governance piece, this is where we'll find all the different levels of privileged access management and all the different services that it's attached to. So the first thing that I want to sort of try and explain is when we set up a privileged access role for somebody, we have kind of two different types of privileged access. There's either an access where they are named against the role and then they activate that for a short period of time. Or another way we can approach this is to have a security group that is always got that privileged access, but when the users need it, they elevate their permission by adding themselves to the group through the activation process. Now, there's not a lot of difference in what the user sees when that process happens, but there is some difference in what happens in the background. And the reason we would sometimes go with the group method is where that particular group needs to activate access to a lot of different services all at one time. Or if we've got a scenario where they don't just need access to the application or the role or the service, but they also need access to some files or some content that's secured by the same group. But we don't want them to have access to all of those things all of the time, only while they're performing that particular role. So let's jump in and have a look at how those two pieces work. We'll start off by looking at Azure Active Directory roles. So what do I mean by Azure AD roles? Excuse me. You've probably seen a lot of these and worked with them in the past, because you will be aware of global administrators in your accounts, because that's the typical role that you start with. First user of the system is always a global admin, so that they can configure the service. And then you can delegate additional roles around that. And you've probably given users, other administrators, the global admin role before. So when we talk about privileged identity management for Azure AD, these roles that we'll see in here should look fairly familiar. These are all the possible access rights that you can assign out for administering or controlling Azure AD. And there's the common one there that we're usually all familiar with, the global administrator role. And we'll also have things in here like password administrator and the help desk administrators, Teams administrators. You may be delegating these out. All of these can have an assignment set against them. So let's look at the most basic one, because global administrator is typically the one that we want to protect first, because there will be people in it. So when we talk about configuring a privileged management assignment, what we're talking about is adding individuals so that they have the ability to activate the role. By that we mean they are eligible to use that particular role. We may also have permanently active users as well. So there's often the kind of break glass account or some sort of access that's required for a particular service. Try and avoid those as much as possible around global admin and be more specific with the accounts. I've got one in here today so I can show you the environment from both sides and give you a demonstration of what will happen when you activate services. So for an eligible assignment, we need to give it some settings or some controls around, what do we want to happen when somebody comes to activate their global admin role. So that's done through the settings menus in here. And this is where we specify that kind of policy as to what they need to do and what will happen when they do perform that activation. So we get to control the maximum amount of time they're allowed to have that role before they have to either reactivate it or extend it. So that's the kind of the point where we'll recheck that they should still have the role on. And the idea of that is to have that time limit where we will then kind of cut that access off to ensure that we haven't left somebody with global admin rights or whatever the right is by mistake. The justification piece around activation, this is around our audit trails. So to have a record of why they did it and to be able to advise everybody else who participates in this access role why a certain person activated their role, we might require them to put a note on there and tell us why that's happening. And then probably the most useful one that we see everybody should activate for these is to require an MFA check at the point that they activate that particular role. That's a fairly obvious one. It's just a double check that they are who they say they are at the point they obtain that access right. The next layer on from there is whether or not you have an approval process. So in a support environment or a support role, you may allow the help desk admins or the support desk team to drop in and out of the help desk admins role or the Teams admin role, or even the password reset admins without any additional approval. They just need to confirm with a 2FA. But at the point they need to go in and edit something like an enterprise application registration, under that particular role, you might have an approval process. So the support team supervisor or the head of IT or whoever it is in your organization needs to actually approve the fact that they are obtaining that access right. So that would come in through defining the approvers for this particular role. And that's just an email process typically. So an email sent to that person, they have to click approve on the email. That will then immediately activate the role for the user. We have eligibility times, or like the assignment times. So this will be whether or not they can have that right forever, indefinitely, the right to activate indefinitely, or whether or not they've been granted an application administrator role for a period of time because they're working on a project, and you want it to automatically expire their ability to have that right after 6 months, for example, when the project ends. And then we have all the notification pieces around it. So typically an email will go back to the individual, so that's the notify the assignee to say that your role has been activated and you've been granted access. They'll need to know that. I mean, it will show them on screen, but it's useful to have a record of it. But more useful, I think, is to have the admins group or a set of recipients be advised that these roles are being activated. So for your very sensitive privileged access management roles, you'll want to have somebody notified at the point that they activate their access on there, so that everybody knows. Typically, it will go back to the group or a group that are the global administrators, but you might have a specific team that's doing those kind of checks. So that's the basic principle behind what you set up in order to obtain access to the role. And then you've assigned the users on there, so it's just a case of adding the assignments on, and as you would expect, you're just searching your directory to provide people with the ability to activate that role. So let's have a little look at what happens when they want to activate that, or what the process would be. So it's a case of advising the team that are going to use this service to go to the My Activations screen. It is actually part of the Azure Active Directory portal. So when they log in or when they connect, they'll have access to this page, My Roles. You will find it in Azure AD, but I've just shortcut to it here. This is typically what we would do, maybe publish it on a SharePoint page or something for them to use. And then anything that they've been added to that they're eligible for in order to activate will show up on here as an eligible assignment. And then when an individual goes to activate their access on there, the first thing it will do is check through any additional validation requirements. So if we put in there that they need to perform a 2FA check, or there needs to be an approval from somebody, that will come up first at this point. And then because we've allowed them up to 4 hours, they can then select less than that, but they can't select any more. And that's where they would publish their reason to perform the activation and click activate. And then the emails will be sent round to advise the team or the reviewers that access has been granted, taken place. So it's a pretty straightforward activation process when the users need to obtain that privileged role. Now, that's the basics of any of these roles. They'll all configure in exactly the same way. What I also want to show you is how the group activation process works. It's relatively new to Azure AD, but this will give you a bit of an idea of what you might need to put in place if you were going to use it. So I'm going to switch to an account that's dedicated admin, just so I can show you this. What you would need to do is create a group that has to be created this way. You can't go back and retrospectively apply it to groups that already exist. So if you've got a group that you need to do this with, as you create the group, it will give you the option to activate a feature on there for Azure AD role assignment, and you need to select that for yes. At the point you do that for the first time, it will onboard the group process to your Azure AD. So once you've got a group that has role assignment enabled against it, you can then, through the privileged identity management service, you can use that to apply group access through here. So what we do here is the group will show up as being available for use with privileged identity management, and then from within the group we can create the same level of kind of activation process. So in here we can create eligible assignments and place the users into them. So I'm not activated as an admin at the moment, so I can't change the assignment in here, but I do have the ability to activate my membership of that group. Now, a really useful thing to think about here is this doesn't then just apply to admin functions. You can use that type of capability against any area of your IT environment where somebody might need to be granted membership to a group to perform a certain function against any application or any data for that matter. You might have read-only access to all of your policies, but you can use privileged identity management through group membership to allow certain individuals to add themselves to a group where that group is then granted right access to your policies and documentation, so that you've got an audit trail of who's been in to perform updates or amendments to that particular data set. So group membership approached slightly differently. You have to make sure that when you create the group that you enable the ability for Azure AD roles to be assigned to it. That will then publish it under the Active Directory, under privilege management in a list of groups. And then from the groups, you can then create roles and assignments. And in there, you can specify what permission level they get. And depending on what it is you're targeting, you'll get different permission levels. But generally for a group in here, when you create those individuals, you assign them either the ability to be a member or the ability to be the owner of that group on a temporary basis. When you set up those assignments in there, so you can see here we've got our eligible access piece, you'll get the same set of who's allowed, what's allowed, what's the criteria for them to perform the activation. And in this particular case here, we've got it set up so that there's an approvers piece. So there's a particular individual that's named as the approver, so that joining that global admin's security group would require the individuals to perform an MFA check, and then a notification would be sent to this list of people, and they would have to then approve that through clicking the link on the email before they'll be able to use whatever's attached to that particular security group. So they're the two methods by which we apply controls. You edit and manage them all in exactly the same way, and it's all done through the identity management console in here. Now, another area outside of Azure AD roles that you can control through this same method is access to all of your Azure resources. Now, when we first connect Azure resources, the first thing that you do is target the subscription where all the resources live. Once you've targeted the subscription, it will open up all of the same level of privilege management controls to grant somebody access to maybe manage storage accounts, or you might be managing your security services if you're using something like Sentinel or Log Analytics, where you just want people to have that access right at the point they need to respond to something, and you want to double check that they are the right individual trying to access it at that point they go for that resource. So again, managed in the same sort of way, it will show up through the roles piece in here. So they'll have a published capability. So on here, I can activate my role as owner, for the entire subscription on there. There may be kind of further down the kind of hierarchy of permissions in Azure, points that you want to give them access to. So it doesn't have to be for the whole subscription. It can be for a particular resource group or even an individual resource. And the way that that's defined is very similar to the Azure AD admin roles through here. And those of you who are familiar with the Azure environment, these are all the possible permission roles that you can have or that come with Azure itself. If you've created your own roles within Azure, they will also be available through here. So you're not limited on the Azure side to just the roles that Microsoft give you, although there are a huge number of them covered. But you can also do that for your own roles if you've created them. So if I look down here for that owner role that we've configured, when I go into that, it's very similar to managing the permissions through the Azure AD privilege management, in that we have the same settings controls. What do they need to do for activation? How long is it available for? Who gets notified? You see, in this instance, because we're in and out of that subscription quite a lot, there's no need to notify somebody every time we're in the subscription, because it's a different level of administration, but we still have the audit trail on there. So there's still a requirement to provide a justification. Again, because we work with those resources to configure services, or we might be working with them to run analytics against them in this particular instance, then there's typically a longer period of time that that's active for. So that's how we deal with Azure resources, by providing users with the role-based access that we're used to in Azure, but this time they have to go into My Roles first and then activate that capability against those Azure resources before they have the permission to be able to make changes or whatever it is that they're required to do. So it's should be very familiar in all the different scenarios, whether it's group access, Azure resource access, or Azure AD admin role access. You set them all up in the same way. You define these different sets of criteria that the users need to complete before they're able to have that level of access that you want to give them. Now, I mentioned at the beginning around reviews and the ability to check that who's still got access and how that, what they've got access to. So this is all done here through access reviews in identity governance. We have the same kind of tiers of access reviews. We've got reviews against Azure AD roles. We've got reviews against group assigned roles, and also reviews against Azure AD roles. Azure subscription roles. To create an access review is really quite simple, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with those admin roles at all. It can just be against groups. This can be very useful in a scenario where you've got access to the finance packages. It's a connected application through enterprise applications in Azure AD, and you then have different levels of access by having different security groups from Azure AD granting access to roles within that finance application. People have different access to different areas of the finance system or the ERP system. In here, you can come in and target those particular groups. So if we have a group for a particular finance package, or might even be something as simple as Office 365 group membership or team membership for that matter. Team membership can get kind of say a little bit out of control, but it can get quite complex over time, especially if it's, as designed, devolved to the users, so they put themselves in and out of teams, or they request access to teams. You might need to make sure that somebody is reviewing who's still got access to what at a set period. Most of our policy documents say that we check these things at least annually, so this is a way we can use identity governance and the privileged management service to do those checks. So if I needed to know who's in the finance team, and I needed somebody to check that the right people are in the finance team on a 6-monthly basis, something like that, I can use this service to create a review of all users that are in that particular, in this case it's a team, a 365 team, but it's also attached to access to our ERP system, so useful to do. And then when we set up a review, we're either going to target it to a set named list of auditors for that particular review, or what we find very useful to do is use the managers of the users, or if we're reviewing the group as well, we can use the group owners. Right, so think about when you're setting up users and groups in Azure AD, set them up with managers and owners, often gets skipped. But very useful to do, because when you come to set up access reviews, if all the managers are assigned, then you can make it or devolve the responsibility to those managers to perform the particular review. So managers of the users, and if those managers are disabled accounts or something, or they don't have a manager on that particular user account, you can then fall back to a list of named individuals who will perform the task for them. You give it a duration in days in which they have to make the response. So once the emails are sent out, how long are you going to give them to perform that check? You know, maybe a month or so. And how often do you want that check of membership to take place? So twice a year, you know, once every 6 months, typically kind of good place to start. Pick your start date for when the first one's going to go out. So we do that 1st of September, for example, and we're just going to run that indefinitely, or there might be a certain time period in which we want that review to take place. And then we control what we want the review to do. So typically we could apply a kind of automatic change, or we would apply an automatic change. So if it's not reapproved, take the user out of the group. Give the reviewers enough time in order to cover it, and don't forget holidays and things, people might be off, so often, you know, the reviews can be given a reasonable amount of time to do it. And if what action to take if the reviewer does not make the response in that particular time frame. We can also notify additional people at this point if we need to of what the outcome of the review was per person. And then when the reviewers make those, or they click the link basically, and they approve whether they're staying in the group, do we want a justification from them? So again, this is all about building up our audit trail, and then how are we notifying them? So generally we're sending them out an email notification, and if they haven't done it within you know, the first few days of a 5-day review, for example, then we might send them a reminder to make sure that they are going to do it. And that's pretty much it to setting up a review. Give it a name, and it will create an entry here against the list of reviews. These ones are pretty simple. They're just kind of group assignments on here. So they're just checking who's a member of the group and notifying those reviewers to perform that check every 6 months or so. Same thing applies when we're doing it through Azure AD roles. It's a little bit more hidden. When we come into here, you'd come down into manage the roles, and then down here you'll find the access reviews. Same applies when you're doing access reviews for security roles against Azure resources. So groups at the top level, the access reviews for Azure AD roles hidden slightly further down under the Azure AD role management, and again same thing for the Azure resource roles. So that's how we set up access reviews. Really good way to make sure that we've got a kind of checks and balances against who's got which privileged access across our organization. Now, a sort of final piece that I want to show in a demo here is not really part of privilege management, but something that I think you'll find very useful, and that I just want to highlight is around this entitlement management service in identity governance. So this is something that we use quite a lot as a service provider, but you can see environments where it would work very well. The idea or the notion here is that you've got some resources that either people within your organization or from a partner organization or an external party, you need to identify them by domain name if they're outside of your organization. So that's why it's typically an external party. It's a set of resources that you would want to delegate access to for a period of time and have some reviews in place, where you don't necessarily want to have that done through your support team. You know, you want to make it a job for them to do, where you've got to document the process and kind of manage that manually. If you want to set it up as an automated process, you can do that in here through this entitlement management. So the basis of this is we've got a catalog of resources that can be accessed. We just add the resources into the various catalogs. So in this one here that I've mocked up, let's say we have an external contractor that participates in some project work that we're doing, and we need to be able to provide our external contractor with the ability to add their own people to work on this project, take them away again, and give us the ability to review regularly who they've given access to these resources, and then at the end of the project be able to do a final check to make sure that nobody has access that they shouldn't do anymore. So for this particular piece of work, they might need access to one of our firewall systems because they're working on those. They need access to some resources in the team service for where the project's teams work, and they probably need some access to what's been sold as part of the service. They might need some access to some of the sales team information. So we put those resources together in what we call a catalog, and then we create an access package for that where we decide who and how that's going to be managed. So I'll just walk you quickly through what the idea here is. So we'd give it a name and a description because it's going to be published on a web page that they can go to perform that access check. We'd decide which services are part of this activation. So those ones that I showed you there briefly, I'm just going to put them all in just so that we've got something on here that you can see. And then you'll note on here, it's going to ask me what role they're going to get for these, and the system picks out what's applicable to the resource type we've put in. So they're going to become a member of a group. What type of member are they? The owner of the group or the member? So that matches up there. When we talk about an application, we mean an enterprise application or an app registration in Azure AD. So you might have different roles assigned to it. These would be configured by you if you've done them. Otherwise, it would always come up with user as a default. And then this should look fairly familiar. When you're talking about accessing a SharePoint location or a SharePoint resource, you'll have the security groups that have been defined for that particular SharePoint resource to select from. So this is what level of access is going to be granted to these services when the request is processed. Then we talk about who's going to be provided the ability to request this. 3 different choices here. This one's quite interesting. If you don't want to do this as a delegated process, but you want to have a catalog of permissions that your help desk users or your support team can assign out to people when requested by line managers, for example, you can set this to none, and then the package exists in this identity governance catalog, and your support team, as long as they've got the relevant security admin rights or above, will be able to come in here and assign things. So you can build a catalog of permissions. You don't have to refer to kind of manual paper processes in order to know what rights people need for a certain job role. Otherwise, you can make it self-service to your own directory, specific people or everybody across the directory. And then we drop back into the privilege management service piece where we can put in place a set of requirements for approval. So that's typically a justification. So it's either the manager of the resource, so that would be owner on the group, owner on the SharePoint site. There is a owner control around applications as well, or you might have specific people for this process that you can specify in there, and then how long do they get in order to perform that approval process before it's just skipped, and the user would have to go around the process again and re-request it. Everybody would be notified on email as you go through this what's going on there. It might also include guests, so external parties, and that's really important because if we were doing something like a request for users outside of your directory, and in our example we were talking about a contractor that's giving us working on a project with us, and they're going to manage their own employees who are going to drop in and out of the project. In there we would specify that these particular organizations that we've configured as connected organizations, so we've specified the domain names for them, are allowed to add their own users in there. And what you would do in that scenario where they're going to manage it themselves is you would have in here an external sponsor. So that would be a guest account, for example, the head of the projects team at the contractor who you've already invited into Azure Active Directory, place them in here as the sponsor control, and they will get the approval notification as their employees request access to work on your particular project. You can get some extra information from them, so you can put some questions in here and you can add more of those if you want to capture that. It will just store it in the audit trail for you. And then in the lifecycle piece, we can specify how long this is available for. So if it's been set up specifically for a certain organization external to you to perform a task for the next year or so while they're under contract, and they are going to manage their own people accessing the resources that you've granted, then you can place those in here, and then you'll want to know who's using it. So this is similar to setting up the access review. In fact, it does just provision those access reviews. This is like a wizard in front of it, but does it for all of the resources against all of the people that are included in this access package. And you can specify the reviewers again, or likewise set the manager, or which would be the owner if it's a group, against those individuals, and how frequently do you want those reviews to start. So you've got complete visibility and control over what's going on, but you're devolving the ability for those individuals to request that access. Now, how they request that access, really quite simple. There's a site, myaccess.microsoft.com, that you would direct either your own employees to, or if it's an external contractor, they need to specify the @your domain name on the end of that URL, and then it will take them here, and all of the published access packages that have been created for them are available. So this is the self-service portal for your own users or your external contractors to manage their access to your service, leveraging the PIM platform for reviews and activations. And again, you could still put the same PIM controls in around those particular users. It doesn't matter if they're guests or users within your environment. If PIM is in place after they've been granted access through the access package, then the PIM process would kick in again and make them provide that 2FA and that justification each time they activate in order to access the service. So I've covered quite a lot there, and it's very much a whistle-stop tour. That's what a lot of these tech talks are all about. It's just to give you a bit of an overview and an idea. I'm sure some of you are thinking up kind of scenarios and things that you might like to use those with. Please do reach out and ask questions, or get in touch with us if you want to walk through a particular scenario that you're interested in seeing how it might work. Before I get onto the Q&A piece, the one piece that always comes up on these talks, so I think I'm going to start to add these in at the end of them, is what does this cost? How do I do it? What's the basic principle for licensing the thing? Everything that I've shown you here today requires you to have an Azure AD Premium Plan 2 license somewhere in the subscription for the users. So it doesn't matter how you acquire that. You can get it as an individual order item. It comes with a number of the bundles from Microsoft 365 or the Enterprise Mobility and Security bundles. So look into what licenses you've got and have a look at what you've already got on your platform. Can you test it and try it out? This is an important point to note, because I know there's quite a lot of confusion around who needs to be licensed for this. As far as the terms of service stand, you need to be licensed for the features in which you are, or the features in which you are using. You'll note when you add an Azure AD Plan 2 license to your account, the whole Active Directory gets upgraded to that capability because of the way it works. That's just sort of part of the mechanics behind it. But in terms of license compliance, these are just a few scenarios to help try and explain how you would need to license it. So in essence, anybody who is using the eligibility function or is performing the reviews needs to have a license. So the first example scenario here, I've got, what I'm saying is, although there are 10 admins across the environment, 2 of them are global admins. The others might have lots of different admin roles, but they're assigned those, they're fixed members of those roles. But there are 5 people who are named as the ability to activate. So that would be 5 licenses for those individuals. In the second scenario there, although we've got 2 global admins who are managing the PIM service, the key piece here is we've got 14 engineers who can activate the global admin right on demand. So they're going to the My Roles portal when they're activating things. So they all count for needing a license. But in their activation process, 3 other people need to approve. 3 people get the notification with the option to approve when those 14 request that access. So in total there, we've got 17 licenses required in order to do that. But the 2 global admins who are managing all of it wouldn't necessarily need a license because they're not participating in using the service. An area here that I just wanted to give an idea around is that access package piece, because I think that's really key to the identity management and kind of simplifying and making a workflow that can be managed effectively. In the access package scenario, unless our guest users are going to be put through a privileged activation of a role after they've been granted the access right, none of those users need the Plan 2 license because they're not participating in the process. It's the guest user as the contractor who's doing the activations, who's doing the reviews. So you've got 50 guests at the contractor who are going to go to the apps portal and request their access. There's 1 person there who was named to do the approvals. That person will need a license in order to perform the approval piece. And then anybody else in that process that's doing the reviews, they will also need the license in order to approve or review and perform the reapproval on the review. So hopefully that just gives you a few ideas about how you'd need to license it. It's for individuals that are participating in the functions within the PIM service. Okay, I usually leave a few takeaways. So the main things here to kind of remember from all of this is privileged identity management covers your Azure administrative groups. It covers any Azure AD security groups, so you can use it for obtaining access to a security group to obtain access to other resources, and it also covers the ability to activate access to all of your Azure resource access roles. Access reviews can be used against any group or application as well as the privileged access roles, so they don't need to be participating in anything else in PIM. You can use the access reviews as long as those reviewers are licensed for the service. They can review membership of any group that is in Azure AD, as long as it's an Azure AD group, because it can't take people in and out of an Active Directory synchronized group. And most importantly is to leverage the use of that manager and owner right, so that you can devolve the responsibility for reviews, obviously licensing permitting, but you can devolve the responsibility of reviewing who's been added to your Azure AD as guests, for example, or who's been added to membership of a group or membership of a group that gives access to an application. With that, I think we'll have a little look to see what we've got in the Q&A, if anybody's got any questions. and hopefully I'll try and answer as best I can. So we've got one comment from somebody here that says the whole process of registering for this through Eventuate has been a nightmare for us to create. So okay, I will ask one of our a member of our team to get in touch with you, Tom, and cover that off. We've got here. Yep, thanks for joining us, Will. And I'm sure we will cover off some access reviews in the near future. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for the Q&A. I think our marketing team have got a survey in there where we look at what we might do for the next security talk. There will be one in a month's time, so we'll publish the topic for that. And I think that just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.